Welcome to Cat Has Questions, curiosity, stories, and the strange corners of everyday life. "39 people were found dead inside a mansion in California. They were dressed nearly identically. Black shirts, black sweatpants, matching Nike shoes. Some still had purple cloths draped over their faces. And beside many of the bodies, investigators found packed suitcases. Because the people inside that house did not believe they were dying. They believed they were leaving Earth." Hello. I'm Kat, and welcome to Cat Has Questions. Today we're talking about Heaven's Gate, one of the most infamous cults in American history. But what makes this case so unsettling isn't just how it ended. It's how ordinary the path there looked at first. Because this didn't begin with bunkers or weapons or obvious extremism. It started with searching, belonging, reinvention, and eventually complete separation from the world outside. Here's what we know. Heaven's Gate was an American new religious movement known primarily for the mass suicides of its members in 1997. It's often described as a cult, and it was founded in 1974. It was led by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. Nettles and Applewhite first met in 1972 and went on a journey of spiritual discovery, identifying themselves as the two witnesses of the Book of Revelation, attracting a following of several hundred people in the mid-1970s. In 1976, a core group of a few dozen members stopped recruiting and instituted a monastic lifestyle. Scholars have described the theology of Heaven's Gate as a mixture of Christian millennialism, New Age, and ufology, or UFOs. And it has been characterized as a UFO religion. The central belief of the group was that the followers could transform themselves into immortal extraterrestrial beings by rejecting their human nature, and they would ascend to heaven, referred to as the, quote, next level, or the evolutionary level above human. The death of Nettles from cancer in 1985 challenged the group's views of ascension. While they originally believed that they would ascend to heaven while alive aboard a UFO, they came to believe that the body was merely a container or vehicle for the soul, and that their consciousness would be transferred to next-level bodies upon death. Jump to March 26, 1997. Deputies of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department discovered the bodies of 39 active members of the group, including Applewhite, in a house in the San Diego County suburb Rancho Santa Fe. They participated in a coordinated series of ritual suicides, coinciding with the closest approach of comet Hale-Bopp. So this was a comet that was going by at the time, going by Earth. Just before the mass suicide, the group's website was updated with the message, "Hale-Bopp brings closure to Heaven's Gate. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. Graduation from the human evolutionary level. We are happily prepared to leave this world and go with T's crew." So let's take it all the way back. The son of a Presbyterian minister and a former soldier, Marshall Applewhite, began his foray into biblical prophecy in the early 1970s. In March 1972, as I mentioned, he met Bonnie Nettles, a 44-year-old married nurse with an interest in biblical prophecy. The circumstances of these two meeting are unclear. According to Marshall's writings, the two met in a hospital where she worked as a nurse while he was visiting a sick friend. Applewhite had recently been dismissed from his role as a music director at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, over an alleged relationship with one of his male students, and his wife had previously left him due to his multiple relationships with men. These personal and professional setbacks left him feeling depressed. James Lewis suggests that Applewhite was a patient at the facility where he met Nettles. Applewhite claims, like I said, that he was only visiting the hospital. It was a psychiatric hospital where Nettles worked as a nurse but was not receiving treatment himself. Nettles wrote an astrology column for a Houston newspaper, drawing on the insights from Brother Francis, a 19th century Franciscan friar she believed she was channeling. She was also involved with the Theosophical Society and participated in weekly seances in her local group in Houston. At the time she met Applewhite, her own marriage was falling apart. Applewhite later recalled that he felt that he had known Nettles for a long time and concluded that they had met in a past life. She told him their meeting had been foretold to her by extraterrestrials, persuading him that he had a divine assignment. I would just like to pause for a second and say I'm maybe a little concerned that she was working in a psychiatric hospital as a nurse with some of these thoughts, that she was talking to extraterrestrials, but that's just me. And so, as I mentioned, it's unclear if Marshall was a patient there when they met, or he claims he was just visiting somebody, but others say that's not true. Applewhite and Nettles pondered the life of St. Francis of Assisi and read works by others. They kept a King James Bible and studied passages from the New Testament that focused on Christology, asceticism, and eschatology. So it sounds like they read a lot of like Christian kind of books, the Bible, like mainstream Christian stuff. But Applewhite also read a lot of science fiction, including works by Robert Heinlein and Arthur Clarke. So leaning into the science fiction too. By June 19th, Applewood and Nettles' beliefs had solidified. They concluded that they had been chosen to fulfill biblical prophecies and had been given higher-level minds than other people. They wrote a pamphlet that described Jesus' reincarnation as a Texan and veiled reference to Applewhite. Furthermore, they concluded that they were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation, and occasionally visited churches and spiritual groups to speak of their identities, often referring to themselves as the Two or the UFO Two. Pretty straightforward. They believed they would be killed and then resurrected, and, in view of others, transported onto a spaceship. This event, which they referred to as the demonstration, was to prove their claims. These ideas were poorly received by other religious groups, understandably. The, quote, Two would gain their first follower in May 1974, Sharon Morgan, who abandoned her children to join them. A month later, Morgan left the Two and returned to her family. Nettles and Applewhite were arrested and charged with credit card fraud for using Morgan's cards, although she had consented to their use. The charges were dropped, and a routine check revealed that Applewhite had stolen a rental car from St. Louis 9 months earlier, which he still possessed. Applewhite spent 6 months in jail, primarily in Missouri, and was released in early 1975, rejoining Nettles. So they did have their kind of run-ins with the law a little bit, even at the beginning. Eventually, Applewhite and Nettles resolved to contact extraterrestrials and seek like-minded followers. I think they struggled a little bit to find followers, and they'd get some, and then they'd lose some when they had some more outlandish ideas. They published advertisements for meetings where they recruited disciples, called, quote, the Crew. At the events, they purported to represent beings from another planet, the next level, who sought participants for an experiment. They said those who agreed to participate in the experiment would be brought to a higher evolutionary level. In April 1975, during a meeting with a group of 80 people in Studio City, Los Angeles, they shared their simultaneous revelation that they were the two witnesses in the Bible story of the end time. According to Benjamin Zeller, while accounts of the meeting differ, all describe it as monumentous and agree that Applewhite and Nettles presented themselves as charismatic leaders with an important spiritual message. About 25 individuals joined the group. So they're kind of slowly gaining followers, but you have to realize too, in a lot of these cult situations, they're preying on people who are vulnerable, who maybe are lost, who maybe don't have a group and are looking for a sense of community. But even still, we're at a pretty low number. We're at about 25. In September 1975, Applewhite and Nettles preached at a motel hall in Waldport, Oregon. After selling all worldly possessions and saying farewell to loved ones, around 20 people vanished from the public eye and joined the group. Later that year on CBS Evening News, Walter Cronkite reported on the disappearances in one of the first national reports on the developing religious group. Quote, a score of persons from a small Oregon town had disappeared. It's a mystery whether they've been taken on a so-called trip to eternity or simply been taken. Quote, in reality, Applewhite and Nettles had arranged for the group to go underground, and from that point on is when they started being called Doe and T, as the Two now call themselves. They led nearly 100 members across the country, sleeping in tents and sleeping bags, and begging in the streets. Evading detection by authorities and media enabled the group to focus on Doe and T's doctrine of helping members of the crew achieve a higher evolutionary level above human, which the leaders claimed to have already reached. Applewhite and Nettles used a variety of aliases over the years. As I mentioned, Doe and T, that was a big one, but they also at one point went by Bo and Peep. The group also, as a whole, had several names prior to the adoption of the name Heaven's Gate. At the time, Jacques Vallée studied the group. It was known as Human Individual Metamorphosis, or HIM, H-I-M. The group reinvented and renamed itself several times. Applewhite believed he was directly related to Jesus, meaning he was an evolutionary kingdom level above human. This also just kind of shows you the progression, and the thing that all cults need is like a leader who thinks he's above everybody. His writings, which combined aspects of millennialism, Gnosticism, and science fiction, suggest he believed himself to be Jesus' successor and the, quote, present representative of Christ on earth. Doe and T taught early on that Doe's bodily vehicle was inhabited by the same alien that belonged to Jesus. T was presented as God the Father, Doe's, quote, older member. I need to show love to an Etsy shop because I am literally obsessed with this shirt. It's the Weird Girls Club tee from VizViz shop on Etsy. And I got it in the color yam, which feels very on brand for me, honestly. It's super soft, oversized, and just has the exact weird, spooky, cozy vibe I love. So if you're also a weird girl, highly recommend. Go check out her shop. There's a link to the shop in my show notes. The crew used various recruitment methods as they toured the United States in destitution, proclaiming the gospel of higher-level metamorphosis, the deceit of humans by false god spirits, envelopment with sunlight for meditative healing, and the divinity of the UFO too. In April 1976, the group stopped recruiting and became reclusive, and instituted a rigid set of behavioral guidelines. This is when things get culty, when they start restricting behavior. This included banning sexual activity and the use of drugs, and Applewhite and Nettles solidified their temporal and religious authority over the group. Benjamin Zeller described the movement as having transformed from a loosely organized social group to a centralized religious movement comparable to a roving monastery. Some sociologists agree that the popular movement of alternative religious experience and individualism found in the collective spiritual experiences during that period helped contribute to the growth of Heaven's Gate. Many of Applewhite and Nettles' crew came from diverse backgrounds. Most of them are described by researchers as having been longtime truth seekers or spiritual hippies who had long since believed in attempting to find themselves. They would combine faith in a sort of cultural environment well into the mid-1980s. Not all of Applewhite's crew were hippies recruited from alternative religious backgrounds, though. One such recruit early on was John Craig, who was a Republican and ranch owner who came close to winning a 1970 Colorado House of Representative race. He had joined the group in 1975. So this isn't just a bunch of kind of like hippies off the street, that sort of thing. They were also bringing in, some kind of higher and more powerful people as it went on. Identifying itself by the business name Higher Source, the group used its website to recruit followers beginning in the early 1990s. Rumors started spreading among the group in the following years that the upcoming comet Hale-Bopp housed the secret to their ultimate salvation and ascent into the kingdom of heaven. So basically, this is when they started believing as this comet got closer to Earth, this was like their transportation to the next level. So they were going to hop, or their spirits were or the alien inside of them was going to hop on this comet and take them off into space. Heaven's Gate did receive coverage from Jacques Vallée's book, as I mentioned, Messengers of Deception in 1979, in which he described an unusual public meeting organized by the group. He did express concern about contactee groups, which I know we talked a little bit about in a previous episode. Go back and listen to that one. It's the one, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name of it, where the two guys were laying in the field. Oh my gosh, I'll think of it later. Where they were wearing the rock eye masks and they died. They clearly had taken something. Anyways, so he expressed concern about contactee groups, authoritarian political and religious outlooks, and Heaven's Gate did not escape criticism. It was known to the media, except for it was largely ignored. Heaven's Gate was better known in the UFO circles and through a series of academic studies by sociologist Robert Balk. So, it's this weird teeter-tottering of UFO and religion, as I explained. In January 1994, LA Weekly ran an article on the group, then known as the Total Overcomers. Richard Ford, who would play a key role in the 1997 group Suicide, discovered Heaven's Gate through his article and eventually joined them, renaming himself Rio D'Angelo. Coast to Coast AM host Art Bell discussed the theory of the companion object in the shadow of Hale-Bopp on several programs as early as November 1996. Speculation has been raised as to whether Bell's program contributed to Heaven's Gate's group Suicide. So, this brings us to the accumulation of the mass suicide. In October 1996, the group rented a large house which they called the Monastery, which was a mansion located in Rancho Santa Fe, California. That same month, the group purchased alien abduction insurance that would cover up to 50 members and would pay out $1 million per person. The policy covered abduction, impregnation, or death by alien. I didn't realize you could get this insurance. That's wild. Who's selling that? Who is selling alien abduction insurance? Let me know. On March 13th, 1997, media reported on a mass sighting of unidentified lights over Phoenix. During March 19th and 20th, Marshall Applewhite taped himself in a video titled Doe's Final Exit, speaking of mass suicide and the only way to evacuate this Earth. After asserting that Comet Hale-Bopp was the sign that the group had been looking for, as well as the speculation that an unidentified flying object, a UFO, was trailing the comet. So I'm sorry, they weren't going to get on the comet. There was a UFO behind the comet that they were going to get on. Applewhite and his 38 followers prepared for ritual suicide, coinciding with the closest approach of the comet so that their souls could reach the next level before the closure of Heaven's Gate. Members believed after their deaths, a UFO would take their souls to another level of existence above human, which was described as both being physical and spiritual. Their preparations included most members videotaping a farewell message. Of the 39 people, 21 were women, 18 were men, and they were between the ages of 26 and 72. And they were believed to have died in 3 groups over 3 successive days, with the remaining participants cleaning up after the prior group's death, which is just so morbid. So basically, all these people had prepared in this big house to die. You can find pictures are horrifying, so just trigger warning of them all laying out in different spots. And the known thing about this is the Nike shoes. They all had the same Nike shoes on. The suicides began on March 22nd and 23rd in 3 waves. The members took lethal doses of sedative drug phenobarbital mixed into applesauce or pudding. They also consumed vodka, which can cause fatal overdose when combined with barbiturates. Afterwards, they secured plastic bags around their heads to induce asphyxiation. So if the overdose didn't do it, they were also going to asphyxiate. All 39 were dressed in identical black shirts and sweatpants, brand new black and white Nike Decades athletic shoes, and armband patches reading Heaven's Gate Away Team, one of the many instances of the group's use of Star Trek terms. Each member carried a $5 bill and 3 quarters in their pocket, and according to former members, this was standard for members leaving the home for jobs, and it was a, quote, humorous way to tell us that they had all left the planet permanently, quote. The $5 bill was for covering the cost of vagrancy laws, and the quarters were for calling home from payphones. Another former member stated that it was a reference to a Mark Twain story, which was said $5.75 was the cost to ride the tail of a comet to heaven. No such passage of the writing from Twain is known to exist, so I'm not really sure where that came from. So basically how it worked was after a member died, a living member would arrange the body by removing the plastic bag from the person's head, followed by posing the body so that it lay neatly in its own bed, with faces and torsos covered by a square purple cloth for privacy. In a 2020 interview with Harry Robinson, 2 members who were not in Rancho Santa Fe when the suicides happened said that the identical clothing was a uniform representing unity for the mass suicide. While the Nike Decades were chosen because the group got, quote, a good deal on the shoe, Applewhite was also a big fan of Nikes, and therefore everyone was expected to wear and like Nikes within the group. Heaven's Gate had a saying, just do it, echoing Nike's slogan, but pronouncing do as dough to reflect Applewhite's nickname, so just dough it. Creative. Among the dead was Thomas Nichols, brother of the actress Nichelle Nichols, best known for her role as Uhura in the original television series of Star Trek. Sorry, I have literally never seen Star Trek, so I don't know how you pronounce that. Applewhite was the third to last member to die. 2 people remained after him and were the only ones found with bags over their heads and not having a purple cloth covering their top halves. Before the last of the suicides, similar sets of packages were sent to numerous Heaven's Gate affiliated individuals or formerly affiliated. Among those on the list of recipients was Rio D'Angelo. The package D'Angelo received on the evening of March 25th contained, like other packages that were sent out, 2 VHS tapes, one with Doe's final exit, and the other with the farewell messages from the group followers. It also contained a letter stating that, among other things, quote, "We have exited our vehicles just as we entered them," quote. D'Angelo informed his boss of the contents of the package and received a ride from him from Los Angeles to the Heaven's Gate home so he could verify the letter. D'Angelo found a back door intentionally left unlocked and used a video camera to record what he saw. After leaving the house, D'Angelo's boss, who had waited outside, encouraged him to make calls alerting the authorities. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department received an anonymous tip through 911 on March 26th, suggesting they check on the welfare of the residents. Days after the suicides, the caller was revealed to be D'Angelo. And this is a transcript. The caller: "Yes, I need to report an anonymous tip. Who do I talk to?" The Sheriff's Department: "Okay, this is regarding what?" Caller: "This is regarding a mass suicide, and I can give you the address." The lone deputy who first responded to the call entered the home through a side door. He saw 10 bodies and was nearly overcome by a pungent odor as the bodies had already begun decomposing in the hot Southern California spring. After a cursory search by 2 more deputies found no one alive, they retreated until a search warrant could be procured. So I'm sure they got this call and they were like, okay, sure, yeah, mass suicide. Sent one guy out there. That poor lone deputy. So the Heaven's Gate deaths were widely publicized in the media as an example of mass suicide. When the news broke of its relation to Comet Hale-Bopp, the co-discoverer of the comet, Alan Hale, was drawn into the story. He chose not to respond until the next day at a press conference after researching the details of the incident. Dr. Hale discussed the scientific significance and popular lore of comets and gave a personal account of his discovery. He then talked about the combination of scientific illiteracy, willful delusions, and a radio talk show's deception about an imaginary spacecraft following the comet, and a cult's bizarre yearnings for ascending to another level of existence that led to the Heaven's Gate mass suicides. Well before the Heaven's Gate, he had told a colleague, "We're probably going to have some suicides as a result of this comet." The sad part is that I was really not surprised. Comets are lovely objects, but they don't have apocalyptic significance. We must use our minds, our reason. News of the mass suicide motivated the copycat suicide of a 58-year-old man living in Marysville, California. The man left a note dated March 27th, which said, quote, "I'm going on the spaceship with Hale-Bopp to be with those who have gone before me," and imitated some of the details of the Heaven's Gate suicides as they had been reported. The man was found dead by a friend on March 31st and had no known connections with the actual Heaven's Gate group. At least 3 former members of Heaven's Gate died by suicide in the months following the mass suicide. On May 6th, 1997, Wayne Cook and Chuck Humphrey attempted suicide in a hotel in a manner similar to those used by the group. Cook died, but Humphrey survived and was saved by authorities. Another former member, James Pickery Jr., died by suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound on May 11th. In February 1998, Humphrey killed himself in Arizona. His body was found carrying a $5 bill and 4 quarters in his pocket. Next to him was a note that read, "Do not revive." Although most people considered the event a mass suicide, sociologist and former cult member John Jalalich referred to the event as murder. UCLA psychiatrist Louis J. West described the dead members as, quote, "victims of a hoax. There was villainy here." 2 former members, Mark and Sarah King of Phoenix, Arizona, are believed to maintain the group's website still, operating as the Tella Foundation, Telah. The house at which the mass suicide took place carried a stigma throughout the neighborhood. Local residents opted to rename the street on which it was located to Paseo Victoria, and the property itself ended up being purchased by a local developer in 1999 during a foreclosure sale. It was subsequently purchased by neighbors who razed the building, built a new house in its place, and changed the address. So a little bit about the belief system of Heaven's Gate. It was a mix of Christianity, UFO ideology, and New Age spirituality, and the idea that extraterrestrials had influenced humanity throughout history. Members believed that Earth was about to be recycled, and only spiritually evolved people would be allowed to ascend to what they called the next level. Applewhite and Nettles taught that aliens had planted human life on Earth millions of years ago and would eventually return to collect a select group of evolved individuals. At first, members believed they would physically board a spacecraft and leave Earth, but after Nettles died of cancer in 1985, the doctrine shifted. The group began believing that consciousness could leave the body and ascend spiritually instead. Members viewed their bodies as temporary vehicles rather than their true selves. They believed that to reach the next level, they had to detach from all human identity and earthly attachments, including family, sexuality, money, possessions, and individuality. The group also believed that highly advanced extraterrestrial beings were what humans historically interpreted as God, while evil alien forces, which they associated with Lucifer, manipulated humanity and corrupted Earth's religions. By 1997, members believed a spacecraft hidden behind the Hale-Bopp comet was coming to take them to the next level. In their minds, what happened at the end was not suicide. It was an act of transcendence and departure from Earth. Heaven's Gate taught that there were several ways a person could graduate to the next level. Early on, the members believed they would physically board that spacecraft. Later, it expanded to include natural death, accidental death, or even persecution leading to death as possible paths to ascension. The group itself was highly controlled. The members had to give up nearly all of their personal possessions, relationships, and everything was shared communally. In an effort to eliminate sexual desire and fully reject human identity, several male members, including Applewhite himself, voluntarily underwent castration. The first attempt was done internally by a former nurse within the group and nearly killed the member involved, after which future procedures were performed at hospitals. Despite their isolationist beliefs, Heaven's Gate adapted heavily to modern technology. Members financially supported the group by running a professional web design business called Higher Source, and the cult became known for its heavy use of the internet and computer communication in the years leading up to the mass suicide, which is kind of crazy. So these are people who can code on the computer, so they're smart individuals who are getting wrapped up in this. Heaven's Gate is referenced a lot in pop culture. In the first live episode following the mass suicide, Saturday Night Live aired a sketch where cult members made it to space. In 2017, Heaven's Gate was the subject of a 10-part podcast series called Heaven's Gate, so check that out if you want to get a more in-depth view on this. In 2018, rapper Lil Uzi Vert posted a concept album art for their then upcoming album, but they were threatened with legal action by Mark and Sarah King, who was the couple that was responsible for maintaining the group's website and intellectual property still. So this is still going on, kind of. I mean, they still have their website. There's a documentary on HBO Max called Heaven's Gate, The Cult of Cults. And one thing I'd like to mention too, so the Nike decades, the infamy which was caused by the mass suicides, their limited availability, and their sudden discontinuation have been cited as reasons for high resale value of the Nike decades. The hardest part about Heaven's Gate is that it's easy to look at the ending and think, how could anyone believe this? But cults rarely begin with the unbelievable. They begin with community, purpose, identity, and certainty. Over time, the line between devotion and control becomes harder and harder to see from the inside. By the end, the members of Heaven's Gate believed they were about to evolve into something higher, that Earth was temporary, that a spacecraft hidden beyond the Hale-Bopp comet was waiting for them. And in March of 1997, 39 people followed that belief to their deaths. Not because they thought they were dying, because they thought they were going home. Stay curious. Thanks for listening to Cat Has Questions. If you liked this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who loves a good spiral. See you next week.